Hello, this is my video response to my comprehension article, and it is called Scaffolding Comprehension Skills. It was published in a publication called English Language Teaching in Canada. It's a qualitative study. And interestingly, it was really difficult to find a qualitative article on comprehension that was actually done in the United States. I found one, but this one takes place in Egypt. The author states in the abstract that he used questionnaires and structured interviews. The purpose was to investigate whether ESL teachers intentionally use scaffolding strategies to develop their students' reading comprehension skills, and whether they're actually aware that they're teaching these scaffolding strategies. The author's main question is, to what extent do non-native English language teachers use cognitive and metacognitive scaffolding strategies for developing reading comprehension skills? And this was followed by 5 sub-questions. I'm not going to read all those. So the author states that in the Middle East, non-native English language teachers don't use up-to-date teaching strategies, and that academic training at four-year universities is inadequate. He doesn't provide any evidence for this. It sounds like it's his opinion. In addition, he states that teachers don't receive professional development beyond their university training, and that they're not aware of scaffolding strategies, although they use them intuitively, but not intentionally or systematically. Again, he provides no evidence for this. This is a preview of how bad this article is. So the subjects were non-native English language teachers in intermediate schools in Alexandria Governorate in Egypt. There were 56 males and 38 females. And they provided data about the education levels, the years of experience, and the teachers' teaching loads. Apparently, the more seniority a teacher has, the lower their teaching load. They didn't discuss how what the procedures they used to create the sample was. Things become really confusing after this. There is so much wrong with this article that I'm just going to talk about the highlights. I mentioned that in the abstract, the author states he used questionnaires and structured interviews. Later in the introduction, the author explains he used questionnaires, observations, structured interviews, and teacher self-reporting. There's no explanation of how they used observations, except he said they took place in actual classes and that an observation sheet was designed and used. He says that the observation form is found in Appendix A. There is no Appendix A. There's no further mention of self-reports or structured interviews beyond the introduction. And there's no evidence in the analyses that they ever used self-reports or structured interviews. The author does describe the questionnaire in detail. He explains it consists of 28 statements that reference different types of scaffolding strategies. There are 8 categories, which he includes. It's not clear how the 8 categories were decided upon, and teachers responded using a 5-point scale. So, in the method section, the researcher states that he used 3 main tools. Then he named 4. So they're questionnaires, self-reports, observation sheets, and structured interviews with teachers. He notes that the latter 3 tools were chosen according to, and I quote, the chart prepared for Clark and Graves, 2005, with significant reliability. There's no explanation of the chart itself, and it's not very clear to what the authors are referring in relation to significant reliability. I looked in his reference section for Clark and Graves, and there are actually 2 citations, one for 2004, one 2005. They seem to be the exact same article. They have the same issue in volume. The ending pages number's incorrect in one of them, but it's the same article. So I looked at the article. There are no charts in this article. There's some figures and tables, but they're not related to anything about assessing teachers' scaffolding practices. At one point, the author states the data on the 8 measures on the questionnaire were tabulated and totaled to get the percentage of students choosing each statement. The participants were teachers, not students. Later on, he refers to students again. The table that he used is confusing. The number of teachers sampled is 94, but some of what he's calling the numbers, which I would assume were the number of teachers, are well over 94. Some of them are over 400. So it's not clear at all what these numbers represent. And then he makes other statements that make no sense. He says, it goes without saying that using metacognitive scaffolding strategies for helping students to develop their reading comprehension skills was used to some extent compared with the cognitive strategies with a total percentage, 74-47%. The phrase to some extent is really vague. The percentage used for using cognitive strategies is 52.84%. So you could actually say that using cognitive strategies was done to some extent. So his language is often vague. He states observations were conducted but doesn't present any data for them. He does present the findings of the questionnaire in tables that actually address the research questions, and each table is followed by a brief explanation of the findings. Let me reiterate, the findings are only for questionnaires. There's no findings for any of the other measures he says he used. So the findings were: a number of non-native English language teachers use scaffolding strategies to enhance reading comprehension. Very few non-native language teachers state that they never use scaffolding strategies, and more teachers state that they use these strategies all the time compared to teachers who use them now and then. He found that more teachers use scaffolding strategies to teach reading comprehension than those who actually use it to assess reading comprehension. He found a large amount of non-native English language speakers use scaffolding strategies to enhance reading comprehension skills on purpose rather than incidentally. And when he analyzed each group, he analyzed the participants by gender, education, experience, and teaching load. There was no statistical significance between any of the groups. He had no process for organizing data or identifying patterns or synthesizing ideas. He doesn't appear to have searched for disconfirming or negative evidence. His personal beliefs are not overtly stated, but they can be inferred by a lot of the unusual things he says. There's no mention of external authorities having reviewed the data analysis, and data interpretations. Doesn't even appear the publishing journal reviewed the data or even read the article. There are no procedures mentioned for corroborating evidence. This could easily have been done, considering the author stated the data was collected by multiple means, which he didn't actually use. The questionnaire was the only manner of data collection that was explained in detail. Some of his generalizations are questionable. He states, because the scale in the questionnaire that refers to teachers' use of techniques based on cognitive scaffolding strategies rates the lowest, the teachers are not aware of modern scaffolding strategies such as WebQuest and reciprocal teaching. The conclusion doesn't even seem to be based on the data gathered. The author states it is, quote, interesting that teachers continue to use comprehension questions to help with understanding. He doesn't explain why this is interesting. He states that teachers' use of comprehension questions naturally differs between experienced and inexperienced teachers. This is an assumption. He mentions teachers use comprehension questions to help students understand. There's no reference to research that indicates asking comprehension questions is an effective strategy for teaching comprehension. In fact, it's not. My understanding is that it's not good for teaching comprehension, it's good for assessing comprehension. Um, he states the reason for not having statistical differences between the groups was a result of the homogeneity of the participants, but there's no discussion of what makes them homogeneous. He also states that, quote, logically, female teachers tend to be persistent in helping learners to complete each component of tasks. Again, this is an assumption. Why is this logical? The evidence presented for this is that there were statistically significant differences between male and female teachers in using cooperative strategies, using multiple strategies to help students practice skills, and using metacognitive practices. Metacognitive strategies. Anyway, have I confused everyone? Because I am confused. This article was extremely confusing and poorly written. I'm surprised it ever got published in the first place. There were so many times I wanted to change the article, but I was already so deeply invested in it that I didn't want to read a new article, and plus I thought it was a great example of what not to do. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to your responses.